So, the near-death experience I had is just like it should with anybody, changes quite a bit and changes how you think, changes how you kind of live every single moment from then on. And mine was really wrapped around when COVID was a pretty big thing. And, I live in West Virginia, and that's in America, whoever's watching this. And West Virginia is kind of a state here that feels like it's like the last to do everything, not in a bad way, but it just seems like this region that we call Appalachia here is kind of like stuck in time a little bit sometimes, if that makes sense. So everyone around here wasn't taking COVID super seriously, and it's, the way that West Virginia and Appalachia is built, we're kind of spread apart here. We're not a big crammed together city. So when COVID was going on, I got super sick with it, and the first time I went to the hospital, I never really thought much of it. I thought, oh, okay, maybe they're just going to give me some medicine and they'll send me home, but that was not the case. So I ended up at a hospital, and they actually did send me home, and they said, well, we can't find anything wrong, just kind of relax. I know there's a lot going on, and they sent me home. So after that, I actually ended up going back less than 24 hours later, and they admitted me, and that's when it got really crazy, if I'm honest. I mean, being in the hospital is already stressful, and you don't think at 30 years old that you're really going to deal with anything like that. So they ended up giving me a room, and they're testing me for things, but not really sure what's going on, because COVID at this time again was everything. But I had already had COVID prior to this, and I was kind of recovering from COVID, so some time I guess had went by. So if you ever seen any like medical movies or like TV shows like that, when all the doctors rush into the room and all the alarms are going off and all those things, like that's what was happening to me. And after a few days in the hospital there, all those alarms are going off, and the nurses are coming in the room, and all these things. They say, hey, Mr. Brown, we have to put you on a ventilator. You have to call like your loved ones, and you have to check in with them and tell them what's going on. Which is kind of hard and heavy to hear. They actually sent in a religious person called a chaplain here. That's when it got pretty heavy, was because they were trying to make sure that my soul was right in case I was going to go meet my maker, essentially. And you start to really kind of feel the weight of it all. They put me in a helicopter and take me to a place called Morgantown, West Virginia. And apparently in that helicopter is when I died. And at some point, for some amount of time, I'm not sure. And that's kind of where the near-death experience thing comes in, I guess, truly. If you've ever heard people say, like, hey, like, don't go towards the light, like I was experiencing that. As far as I can remember, is like everywhere around me, as far around me on all sides, there was this infinite white space. And I wasn't touching the ground like anything solid. I wasn't touching anything. I was kind of levitating there. And during that time, I could acknowledge that I wasn't on the earth, but it wasn't some scary thing. Like there wasn't some panic that set in that was like, oh, like I'm not alive. Like if I'm honest, it was honestly the most beautiful and peaceful and serene place I've ever been. It just, again, as far as I could remember, as far as I could see, was just this infinite white space. After a few minutes there, I guess, there was kind of like this black orb. I don't know what else to call it other than this little black ball of energy. But it started like within like arm's reach here. And it was such a weird contrast for that dark ball against the infinite white. But I could just kind of acknowledge it, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't nothing like that. So what that little black energy ball did, it started out really close to my chest, and then it slowly and slowly and slowly went out into the infinite abyss. And I don't know how long I was in there, but it's just so hard to explain how peaceful all that was. And again, I don't know if everyone's religious or not. It didn't feel like I was going the wrong direction. It felt like the outside of heaven, and that's the best I could explain it. I don't feel like I was in the bad place. I feel like I was truly like right there on the outside of it all. So, after I wake up from that, you kind of just start realizing, hey, like I don't know all the answers, and not a lot of people do. There's so much more that we haven't seen, and I don't wish ill harm on anybody, but if everyone could just kind of taste that for a little bit and feel that, because the jarring of it, the most jarring part was that immediate peaceful place that I've experienced, and it's so hard to even put it into words, that peace that you can feel, that I did feel there when I wasn't on the earth. Because when I got back to the earth, it was a snap. It was this jarring, like, wake up call, and just this, it wasn't painful, but it was so heavy when I got back here. So I can't imagine, like, I just have to think, like, why was that so much more peaceful? And it was because there was, like, almost nothing. And I just wonder how much we just clutter ourselves all the time as humans, and we make life so much harder than it is. Like hippies, like back in the 70s, I think had it right, because they were like, all you have to do is love. It wasn't about, when I woke up from that, it wasn't about the things that I had. It was just about wanting more time and realizing how much time I'd spent on the wrong things, and all the energy I spent just not living right, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a message that we often hear with NDEs, that we've been focusing on this material view of the world, right? And you were saying that you almost regretted or felt differently about, where you were putting your energy. So could you expand more on what you were focusing on before that experience, and the sort of things or pursuits that you then felt were maybe unnecessary?
Sure, yeah. So before the NDE, it's okay to live life, I guess, in a way that's kind of relaxed. But I mean, I would encourage people now, like, to realize how you never will get more time. Your time is always running, and it's for everybody. That's the scary part of it all. Is that's the only thing you can't get more of, is time. I think what it really allowed me to do, or what it really made me realize, is to try to, the whole situation made me want to live life with more intention. Time, again, will never come back. And the word regret, I just remember regret being the heaviest feeling I've ever felt in my entire life. At 30 years old, I had enough clarity in some of those moments where I wasn't like hooked up to machines at this point. But all I wanted was more time, and you stopped caring about small things that made you upset, or someone who hurt you, or all these little things that we waste our energy on. Those didn't matter anymore. And still to this day, this is a while ago now at this point, but I have to remind myself, like, okay, you weren't alive. You saw the other side. Maybe shift your perspective back. I mean, again, regret was the heaviest feeling, because I felt like you just don't think it's going to happen to you. And I don't know. I mean, there's room, I guess, there's room, like, you don't have to scrutinize your life, I guess, but I think you should. I think it's Socrates, one of the good philosophers, says, like, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I just wish everyone could kind of take that, and it's not scary that we're all going to die one day. It's kind of freeing. It's kind of this liberating feeling of, like, yeah, so that's why we need to do everything. I have to remind myself of that every day still.
I understand that. And one of the ways, since, doing these NDE interviews has shifted my perspective, is that I tend to look at life more as, if I was to say I'm going to Disneyland this weekend, that would be a trip in itself. So now I look at life as almost that trip, It's a fun thing. I can make what I want of it, and I know that I'm there to sort of play and have a good time and focus on certain things. But I also understand that it is what I want to make out of it. There's no ultimate goal for Disneyland. We don't all go in with the same intentions. So it's helped me for sure, like stress less, control less, which for me used to be a big thing, and still is, to be fair. Like I haven't gotten rid of it completely. But it's helped see it a bit more as a game. And when you see it as a game, I think things like regret or, thinking, is this the wrong path? Have I made a wrong decision? Those tend to not happen as much because you always feel like, oh, I can just steer the ship, the other way if I'm feeling it's not right. So it feels much more fluid than it did before, to me at least.
Yeah, I love kind of looking at life through the lens of a video game. Like, if you play a game, you'll pick up an item or you'll meet somebody or whatever. All of these things can benefit you in some way, and it's not that you have to max out your stats. Like you said, I guess I just want to encourage people, like, take the pressure off themselves. Like, no one has it figured out, and fortunately and sort of, I guess, unfortunately, we're all going to die one day, but that's not scary. And especially knowing what I know now, I feel like, obviously I don't want to die yet. I'm not ready to die, but if dying is anything like that, I'm going to be okay with it when that time comes. That peace that was there, and that even though there was nothing, it was still everything, and it was so fulfilling to be in that space where just the peace was so fulfilling and so rich that I've never experienced that peace on earth. It doesn't scare me anymore. Dying doesn't scare me anymore.
So when you were, in that space that's so different than what we have here, do you feel like you were making a choice of coming back or not? Or do you feel like the choice was made for you?
When I was in that space, I didn't have much say in it. I didn't have a choice, really. It's like, I could acknowledge that I wasn't on the earth, but I couldn't really do anything about it. It just was what it was. It wasn't good or bad. Like, I didn't have a say in it, but I also didn't mind.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. So then you sort of come back, and how do you interpret what has happened? Had you heard of NDEs before, or what do you make out of, this whole experience once you're able to think about it and recall it?
There's a lot that you learn when you're dying. There's a lot of time to think, especially in the hospital, because, they were waking me up every 2 hours to, check on me and do tests and whatnot. So you spend a lot of time in the hospitals awake, honestly. You're not sleeping in your own bed. You hook up to all these machines. And I was hooked up to a type of machine called ECMO. And ECMO is basically where they take the blood out of your body and reoxygenate it. And because I had 4 organs that were failing, and I was hooked up to every machine that is pretty much last ditch effort to make that, make your life, hopefully the same as it was before. But you just, again, you learn to let go. You learn to say, I'm on the earth. Like, that's where I'm at now. And you can make a million things out of that. You could be mopey and you could continue to say, like, oh, woe is me. Or you could say, well, this is where I'm at. I would like to know, like, I've talked to some people who've had, like, older, like, parents or grandparents pass. And I feel fortunate because, like, I guess my story has helped them deal with that passing, because they said that they were also really at peace. So I don't know. I hope that everyone experiences this. I hope that while we have the time now, we use it. But again, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm kind of all over the place. I'm so sorry.
No worries. That's quite all right. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I see in the comments as well is people that tend to be more interested in NDs or have had like a similar experience, that fear just sort of disappears, because it used to be this unknown and something that we commonly would all be afraid of, right? We knew it was going to happen to us, it was going to happen to our loved ones, there's no way of avoiding it, but we have no idea when and we have no idea how. And I tend to think that when we don't know how something will happen, we tend to just blow it out of proportion in our minds. So then that's why I think we have this fear of death. And of course, it's also not very common to talk about it. So we suppress it. It's never, conversation, a conversation piece when you're in a group setting. So
Yeah.
tell me about, recovering from COVID is quite difficult. So I can imagine you came back and still there was a way to go to, get your old life back and be able to do everything you're able to do now. But have you come back with any kinds of insights or, ways that you wanted to live your life differently than before?
I think after all that, it took a while to get my body, back to where it was. And again, I was on life support, and, making sure that my body was going to be okay took quite a bit of extra time there and a lot more time in the hospital. And, I don't know. It was such an overwhelming feeling, but I also feel incredibly fortunate to have this perspective now, because I get to have conversations like this with you, and also just I think the biggest thing is I get to remind people to live. And again, maybe there's no big purpose to this whole life. Maybe there's no point to it all. Maybe we're just here just because. And I found a lot more peace in that, because I know now, I just want to be present and here and doing the best that I can regardless. And I guess that's what I learned more than anything, is that we get to be here 1 or 2 times for me, I guess now at this point, but just be present, be here. Don't be in the past or don't be in the future. Just be. Don't worry about what isn't even here yet. And don't worry about what already happened. Just be. This is all we get. And again, time is the only thing that costs something. You can never get change back. You can never recover it. It always moves. So just do it. Just be here now. I think that's what being happy is just being present. I think more than anything, approaching life with mindfulness and gratitude. And again, not everything's going to be, I get it. We're human. It's going to change. It's going to be hard. But I think if people could just shift their perspective a little bit, it would make the life and the time that we have now. If we're lucky, our grandkids will remember us. If we're lucky. But past that, I never knew my great grandparents. I don't know what they did or anything. So that's encouraging is all just to do and be. We have this mortal body that can do anything you ever wanted to do, and it doesn't matter if you don't get to, you can be incredibly valuable if you're the president of the United States or if you just work at Walmart. You still hold the same value.
That's so interesting that you mention, we have the same value, because I think, especially growing up in a Western society, right? It's almost counterintuitive. So it's not necessarily how we're raised. I had a different kind of upbringing, but it was very much what you achieve and your status determines your value. So some of us will be more valuable than others. Perspective that I don't agree with, but it's sort of how I was told the world is, so I just accepted it, and it was my frame of reference for many years until I moved away. So was it for you as well that you were in this pursuit of, material things or status, and has it suffered an impact after your NDE?
Yeah, there's this culture, and maybe it's not just America, but I know in America the culture is you got to grind, you got to work, you got to do this, and you got to this, and make sure to buy this expensive thing. And it's probably like that everywhere to some extent, you know what I mean? But after the whole near-death experience, again, you don't when you are on your deathbed, you don't want Nike shoes. You don't want a Mercedes. You don't want things. It really helped me just to take all the pressure off myself to say, this is who I am. This is all I am. And that's literally fine. Because again, 100 years from now, obviously, I mean, there's people in history that have made significant differences, that good and bad, that we'll always know through history. But there's actually a band called First Aid Kit, and they have a song, I think it's called I Met Up with a King, and they say, we mean nothing to history, thank God. And I think about that line a lot, and it just takes the pressure off of you, and it's okay to be what you are. You don't have to be. Everything is so made up by humans anyway. Like, why? We're setting up these standards that don't even make sense half the time. And, you know, you can get on Instagram right now and compare your life to somebody who is doing XYZ instead of just being the most joyous person with little to nothing. I think there's so much value in almost having less even. I don't know. It could go on and on and on.
Absolutely. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday about a guy talking about financial education, and what he was essentially saying was that we tend to spend a lot of money trying to look rich. And that's just making, you know, people owning those companies rich, that everybody just, like, you know, brands like Louis Vuitton, like Gucci, like people just like will save for so many months and then, you know, say like, oh, that's my, you know, I'll go get this bag, I'll get this belt. It was a few years ago. And it's just because you wanted to seem rich for everybody around you. But clearly you're not if you have to be saving for months to be able to afford that. And I think that's just such a, when you think of it that way, it becomes a bit sad that would be something to focus on. So I wanted to talk to you about mental health as well, because you've encountered this state of peace and you've come back with this insights that you stopped putting a lot of pressure on yourself, it feels like. And you started seeing things in a wider perspective than before. Have you still had issues with your mental health? Have you still had to manage it somehow?
Yeah, as far as the mental health side, I mean, it's kind of like a muscle. You know, you have to work it out. You have to constantly work on it to stay in shape. And, you know, I stopped going to therapy recently, and recently started getting back into therapy rather. And even since then, I mean, I'll be honest, it was kind of odd because, you know, whenever I got out of the hospital, there was a big GoFundMe set up that had like $30,000 in it from people all over the place. And there was a parade. There's people that lined up around my parents' house, a big giant parade, and there were news cameras there because, like, in West Virginia, like the town that we live in is pretty small. So like if something happens to somebody, it's a pretty big deal. But it's odd because I almost forgot. You almost forget that it happened because there was so much joy and so much elation that, oh my God, Alan or Corduroy is alive. And I kind of neglected my mental health for a while because I was so sucked into that. Like, yeah, okay, a lot of people care about me. I died and came back and all these things. And I don't know, you have to, just like with anything else, you have to constantly work on it. So mental health, it's weird because I have some really odd PTSD from it, and I didn't really know that I had PTSD until recently. You know, that happened in 2021, and now in 2024 there'll be times where I feel like I'm right back in the hospital and I didn't even realize it. So you have to work on your mental health regardless, but it definitely weighs heavier sometimes more than ever. And it's odd because in the moment and all the time that went by, you didn't even realize how kind of traumatizing that was. And then you have to like start uncovering it later on, or it'll kind of suck you back in the wrong way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've, heard of people that have had NDEs and only remembered a big chunk of it after 20 years or so. And it seems they're sort of phased sometimes. And Definitely, I think surviving, COVID in the way that you did would take a toll on you, because you were essentially, in the hospital, people expecting or thinking that you were going to die. So you were also being, told this, and you were on the receiving end of that energy. So it must be extremely stressful to know that that happened. And whilst it helps put things in perspective, I also think it's a difficult thing to overcome. So it does not surprise me that, there's still time that you have to manage it and to look into it.
I fight back and forth a lot with now. I think it's this idea that, like, okay, we're gonna die, I have to do everything, but then there's also the other side of me that really fights hard, that says, like, okay, you don't have to do anything. Like, we're all gonna die, it doesn't matter. I go back and forth with that a lot, and I don't think that's a horrible place to be necessarily. I think there's moderation in everything, but I don't know, there's a constant battle within me now that's like, yeah, so what? Like, no one's gonna remember you. But then there's other part of me that's like, no, no one's gonna remember you, so just do everything. And there's like a big struggle between that, honestly.
Yeah, I know what you mean, to be honest. I tend to be that way about work. So I tend to be very intense for short bursts of time. And I love doing that. I love being super intense and hands-on. And then there's times where I sort of want to take a step back. And I sort of don't want to work as much. And what I've come to understand is that I have those seasons where I'm super motivated, and what I don't enjoy, and I always tell people, do not tell me, is when people say, like, oh, you should work less, or you shouldn't work on weekends. So I'll be like, no, like, if I feel like it, and if I feel like I'm not going to sleep tonight because I'm just going to work through the night, like, it's fine. I get to decide that. And I also get to decide, when it's a Tuesday and I don't feel like working. So it's sort of like figuring out what works for you. And the perspective to me of, like, nobody will remember you is also so freeing, because you're almost like free of the expectations that people would put on you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's liberating in the sense that, like, no one's going to remember me. It's terrifying, but it's liberating at the same time. It's an odd balance. And I will say it too, like, again, there's nothing wrong with hard work, but everyone, like, when you die, or when you're dying one day, as someone who has died one day, you're never gonna be thinking about, like, oh, I'm so glad I worked that overtime, I'm so glad I spent extra at a job. And maybe that's not the case for everybody, but for a majority of people, I would say that they don't want, hey, he was a great employee on their headstone. So as far as I know, happiness is just doing more of what you love and less of what you don't. So there's some people that love work, there's some people that love to give, but there's so much more than a job too. I'm saying that as someone who is employed as well. I have a job, I have a full-time job, but I don't want that on my headstone. Oh, he was a great employee. That's not what I can promise you, when you're dying one day, anyone, all of us, that's not what you think about, is the work that you gave to a company. I can say that for sure.
Yeah, I can very much agree to that. I also don't think that it is. So, Corduroy, it was so wonderful speaking with you and listening to your story. For anybody that wants to connect with you and wants to, get in touch, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I go by Corduroy Brown. I'm a musician from Huntington, West Virginia. If you want to check out some of the music, I actually have a few songs written about this near-death experience. One is called Better on the Ground. I've written a song called Medicine. There's a couple different kind of things that allude to that. But if you look up Corduroy Brown WV, you will find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and if you listen to music on Spotify, Apple Music, all the different places that have music. But Corduroy Brown WV, you can learn all about this, and there's all kinds of music about it too. So thank you for taking time to talk about it.